they actually created this guide. This is the Royal Borough of Greenwich, created this guide back in April. It didn't really make news much, you know, and it's been resurfacing on social media at the moment because now it's being distributed to parents and teachers, and that's how you came to find it.
Yes. So I was just on Twitter, as we spend too much time on Twitter these days, don't we? And I just saw something which I thought was extraordinary, that a parent said, my school has just sent me this, and, you know, here was this clip, and, you know, it was gender ideology.
Yeah.
And, you know, it might have been something about, you know, non-binary, pansexual, asexual, LGBTQIA+. I just thought, hang on a second, we've now got schools, and it was Thomas Tallis School in Greenwich, sending this material out to parents.
And let's be clear, some of the document in of itself is doing things like saying you should avoid gender-specific pronouns. They actually list words such as he, her, his as words to be avoided.
Yeah, I mean, so I asked this person, oh, could you send me this document? And when I saw it, I thought it was so extraordinary.
Yeah.
It seemed to go beyond so many things we've seen. It has the usual things like, you know, don't say women get pregnant, say, you know, people get pregnant. I mean, the fact that that's now par for the course is extraordinary.
Yeah.
But then I saw, you know, don't say he, him. And I'm kind of like,
how do you speak English without using these words?
So such an extreme document,
yes,
just under the radar, and now being sent by schools out to parents. Something else which I thought was completely extraordinary, it said, don't say same-sex parents.
Yes.
Say LGBTQIA+ parents.
Right.
And I'm kind of like, oh, my God, this is the erasure of same-sex attraction. We can't refer to it.
Yes.
And that took me back to the court case last week with LGB Alliance, where, you know, there was this implication that you can't refer to same-sex attraction.
Yes. I mean,
or that these old words like lesbian, they actually mean something different now. And I thought, oh, my God, this is really, really pushing against same-sex attraction.
It's very serious because this is going to schools, right?
Yeah.
And there will be gay kids or kids who will turn out to be gay or kids who are struggling with their sexuality. And all of a sudden they're told that being attracted to someone of the same sex it's not really a thing.
Well, to be told to say into your ordinary language, don't say same-sex, say LGBTQIA+. I mean, this is really quite extreme.
Yes.
And as you say, it kind of just erases people, and particularly children just discovering their sexuality.
Yes.
They kind of, I can't refer to who and how I am.
And it's troubling, isn't it?
Talk about it.
But I think the very fact that this didn't get much coverage when this document was published in April, and I wonder whether it's because people would have seen that. I think it did appear in the Telegraph or something like that. And I think people would have seen that and thought, well, it doesn't matter. It's one of these lunatic documents which has been created by some quango, and no one's going to take it seriously. Well, here we are a few months later, and it is being distributed to parents within schools. So that's where it matters, doesn't it? Because now,
that's right.
You know,
so I agree.
means something.
We're used to the stories. You know, look at the sort of lunacy coming from Stonewall.
Yeah.
And then it's gone out to a local council. OK, yeah, we've had those stories. Hang on a second. We now see it going to schools. Now the schools are pushing it out to parents.
Yes.
So insidious and you know, hard to stop, particularly if the local authority is in that chain.
Yes.
So if a parent wanted to complain, they might think, well, I'll complain to the local authority in the first instance.
Yes.
Hang on, this came from the local authority.
Yeah. So what do you do then?
Really
I mean, so this is
pretty insidious.
This is Greenwich. I mean, I wonder to what extent the government is even aware that these kind of materials are being produced and disseminated.
Well, you know, when you gave your list at the start of the show of all these organisations which are sort of backing all these sort of woke ideologies, you left out of the list local authorities.
Yeah.
I think people tend to think, well, you know, a bit boring, but they oversee so many of our services.
They do.
And that brings me on to the other bit, which, you know, I was just sort of staggered by. They boldly stated that when the Royal Borough of Greenwich, when they're interpreting the Equality Act, they won't make reference to sex, which is a protected characteristic in the law.
Yes.
They will interpret that as gender.
It's actually worse than interpretation because in the document itself, which I read and you very kindly forwarded to me, it says one of the protected characteristics is gender or gender identity, and then it says, in brackets, what the Equality Act calls sex.
Yeah.
In other words, it is explicitly misrepresenting the law in order to push an ideological viewpoint.
Yeah.
How can that be something that a local authority is doing and distributing in schools, and how is it being so blindly accepted? Because that is going to get people in a lot of trouble if they think the law is one way and it's actually something very different.
Well, absolutely. But for me, the really critical thing here is, so right across Greenwich, let's say women are looking for protection of their single-sex spaces and services, and let's say, for example, they want a women-only swimming session, or they have some concerns at the local hospital, you know, about single-sex wards, or an elderly woman wants a female carer.
Yes.
And they're sort of approaching the local authority, understanding the Equality Act. We have a right to single-sex services, single-sex spaces. And hang on a second, the local authority will push back and say, no, our interpretation is that they are single gender. Well, hang on a second, there's a trans-identifying male coming into our, you know, single-sex swimming session. We want some protection here. The local authority, no, we interpret that as single gender. I mean, it completely erodes what should be a protection in law for women.
Yes.
When it's coming from the local authority, women don't have many other places to turn. And so that's really concerning. When an authority, which is meant to protect the law, explicitly, openly states its intention to undermine the law.
And this has been something that has been promulgated by Stonewall a great deal. And I remember when there was the case of Jo Phoenix at the University of Leicester, and her invitation was rescinded. And this was on the basis of advice from Stonewall. And the lawyer, Akra Reindorf, pointed out that what was happening here is that, that Stonewall were representing the law as they would like it to be and not as it actually is. And it sounds very much like the Royal Borough of Greenwich are doing the same thing here. And we can't have that, can we? We can't have local authorities blatantly misstating the law and saying you've got to follow our imagined version of the law. I mean, because isn't that going to just store up all kinds of trouble for the future?
I mean, as I say, where do people turn when the local authority itself is saying we're going to misrepresent or misinterpret the law?
Yes.
And this is why we're seeing so many court cases.
Yes.
Of just literally plucky individuals having to challenge this. Some people have said to me this is ripe for judicial review, that if an authority which is meant to sort of manage the law and interpret the law correctly is sort of disregarding the law or misinterpreting the law. But, you know, we're in a really bad place when this is how we have to sort of protect ourselves and our laws, which we've fought for.
Can you explain something to me, though? I mean, do we really have to rely on these very brave individuals like Alison Bailey, like Maya Forstater, who are willing to take these things to the court and pursue them to their ends? Why isn't the government... I mean, the Tory government has been presiding over this stuff for 12 years. It seems to me that some of this has to be top-down, doesn't it, some of these reforms?
Well, this is what we were waiting for. And so you said I was part of Women Uniting. I'm actually part of Conservatives for Women. And we were set up to say to the Conservative government, where are you on this? Over 10 years, gender ideology has been pushed out through all of our public institutions. You know, almost every public institution was a member of Stonewall. Trans women are women. We were seeing the erosion of women's single-sex spaces. So absolutely, where is the Conservative government on this? And I hope in this new reforming era under Liz Truss, we'll finally get some good action on it.
I mean, you know, I'm not suggesting things would be any better under Labour on this particular issue, but it strikes me that you know, for all the accusations that the culture war is something that the Tories have invented and that they're fighting a war on woke, well, if they are, they're not doing a very good job.
They haven't been. We've started to see some pushback. We saw a really great speech from Suella Braverman in August. I know you've got Kevin Lister on later. She very clearly stated that schools, for example, have a right not to use preferred pronouns, not to let boys use the girls' changing rooms, toilets. So we're starting to see some action, but, you know, it's been 10 years, and we absolutely need to see the Tories acting now.
Well, particularly for the children. I mean, there's going to be some young people who are going to be very uncomfortable with a lot of these things that they are being told.
I mean, well, what can I say? You've got Kevin Lister coming on later.
Yes.
Children's safeguarding should be absolutely paramount. And we all know that loads of confused kids, lonely kids, kids searching for an identity are on Twitter, on social media. Sorry, not kids on Twitter, that's us. You know, everything else. And pretty much the main thing which they can identify into now is this gender ideology. And, you know, it promises euphoria and a group and community and engagement, and you're courageous and you're brave. Absolutely essential that us adults push back and say that sex is real and you should feel comfortable in your own body and find your own identity, which is unique and not based on sort of really regressive stereotypes.